hello and welcome to our next video. Now, we finished off the last time with the Reformation having just happened under John Knox's leadership. But from 1560, the first few years after that, it was a difficult time for the church. There was a lot of uncertainty with the return of the Roman Catholic Mary Queen of Scots, and there was a lot of turmoil in Scotland. However, this young church flourished and grew. From 1560, when there was only 12 Protestant ministers in the whole of Scotland, by the time you get to 1567, there's over 250. And worship had been simplified. There was evangelism, there was care of the poor, there was better education so that people could read the Bible in their own language. Now, John Knox died in 1572, and the years and the decades after Knox's death would all be about how the church in Scotland should be governed and by who. Now, Presbyterianism and Episcopalianism are different ways of organising the church. The Reformers and Knox thought that the church should be Presbyterian because they thought that was what was clearly taught in the New Testament. Others thought the church should be Episcopal, and an example of an Episcopal church is the Church of England. Now, in Presbyterianism, Jesus Christ is head of the church. Each congregation elects elders who meet together as a session, and a minister is an elder but with special duties for preaching and teaching. And they make decisions about that session will make decisions about each congregation. A minister and elder from each congregation will meet with others in an area to discuss the church. In a presbytery, they'll meet for a general assembly. Representatives from each congregation from the whole country will meet together as a general assembly and talk about how they move the church forward and make decisions about the church based on God's word. So it's very democratic with Jesus Christ as head of the church. In Episcopalianism, like the Church of England, it's usually the monarch who's the head of the church. And a lot of the nobles and the monarchs preferred that system because it was easier to just influence archbishops and bishops than having to deal with a general assembly like in Presbyterianism. So Presbyterianism, Jesus Christ the head of the church, and it's very democratic. There's no one person controls the church. It's based on God's word. In Episcopalianism, the monarchs usually are ahead, and they under them is archbishops, bishops, etc. And this was going to be the struggle in Scotland for the next few years. In 1574, a man called Andrew Melville steps onto the scene. Andrew Melville had studied at St Andrews, went over to Geneva, and came back in 1574. In 1575, he led a debate in the General Assembly about whether the church should be Presbyterian or Episcopal. Now, such was his knowledge, and he had a great knowledge of the Greek New Testament, that the following year, in 1575, when this General Assembly was meeting, he pointed and said that when the Bible speaks of a bishop, it's not speaking about somebody with a big title and a lot of power. It simply means a pastor or a minister of just one congregation. 3 years later, in 1578, he was the moderator of the General Assembly that adopted the second book of discipline. And the second book of discipline set out firmly that Presbyterianism was the way in which the church was going to be governed in Scotland. In 1580, young King James is on the throne. Mary Queen of Scots' son James became king at just 1 year of age in 1567. So in 1580 there's a bit of worry that there's some Roman Catholic influences on the young king. And a minister called John Craig draws up a thing called the King's Confession, or effectively Scotland's first national covenant. This national covenant, or King's Confession, said that the people were going to defend the true Protestant faith, renounce reaffirmed the renunciation of Roman Catholicism, and it ended with them promising to defend the king, the country and the gospel as well. Now, this is a very important document, and you'll see later on just how important this is, because this formed the first part of the National Covenant of 1638, and we'll talk about that in the next video. However, the king was pushing ahead with his own ideas. The king, James VI, believed in the divine right of kings. The divine right of kings is the false belief that he, the king, is not just head of the state and the country, but he's head of everything, including the church. And he obviously prefers then the episcopal form of church government. So he pushes forward with trying to impose bishops and things on the church. Now, Melville in 1584 speaks out against what the king's doing in some sermons, and he's pulled up for it and to give an account of the things that he's saying. Now, he's threatened with imprisonment, so he chooses to leave Scotland. He goes away for a little while. Doesn't go away for long, just goes away for a couple of years. But with Melville gone, the king passes acts known as the Black Acts. The Black Acts were acts against Presbyterianism. It was giving control to bishops, and it set out to make the king, to give the king full control over all things, including religion in Scotland. And really for the next few years after that, there's a lot of confusion in the church about how the church is going to be governed. And many ministers leave over this. They leave the country. However, Andrew Melville's back 2 years later in 1586, and he continues being the champion of Presbyterianism. He goes to meet the king in 1596 at Falkland Palace, and this is where he has one of his most famous speeches, his Two Kingdoms speeches. He says to the king, "Your Majesty, there are two kings and two kingdoms in Scotland. There's King James's kingdom, where you're the head and we're all your subjects. But there's also King Jesus' kingdom, where you're not the head, you're simply a member and a subject just the same as all the rest of us." The king doesn't listen. The king didn't listen to him at all, and continued in the years after that to impose more bishops on the church in Scotland. In 1603, James VI becomes James I of England, and he moves down there and becomes the head of the Church of England. Elizabeth I, the English monarch, has died with no heir, so it passes to him, and he goes down there and continues to change the church in Scotland and to enforce episcopacy on the church in Scotland. 1605, he postpones the General Assemblies. Some ministers meet anyway up in Aberdeen, and this is saw as treason. Some are arrested and imprisoned, some are banished, some flee. Andrew Melville wasn't part of that assembly, that General Assembly. He however, spoke out in favour of it and said that he approved of it and agreed with it. And for that, he again was arrested. He was taken down to London, and he was put in the Tower of London, where he would stay for just over 3 years in the Tower of London. Now, when Melville was freed after his period in the Tower of London, he was not allowed to stay in Scotland or England, but they did allow him to leave, and he went over to France to preach to Protestants over there. He would never again come back to Scotland. The king moved forward, meanwhile, with his enforcement of episcopacy in Scotland. In 1607, he imposed perpetual moderators. Now, in Presbyterianism, when the General Assembly meets, they appoint a moderator. Now, he's just a chairperson who gets re-elected every year. But here the king is putting perpetual moderators and bishops into the church in Scotland. In 1609, he gives the courts powers to act to enforce episcopacy, the episcopal power in Scotland as well. The following year, 1610, we have a very corrupt General Assembly who meet and they've been bribed by the king. The king has bribed them giving them little gold coins as expenses, only to those who were supporters of him and going to vote the way he wanted them to vote. So he managed to bribe this General Assembly, and he got them to pass rules in favour of episcopacy. In 1612, this is done through the courts, and the episcopal form of church government is officially established in Scotland. Despite many of the church leaders believing it's unbiblical, and men like Andrew Melville standing up and speaking against it. So we're going to leave this video here, and we'll look at what happens next, because we'll see that things are going to get a lot worse in the years afterwards, and especially with the coming of Charles I, James VI's son. So we'll look at that next. But that was Andrew Melville. Andrew Melville was a champion of presbytery. He was a real brave man, and a man who looked at the Bible and says Christ has clearly laid down how his church should be governed, and he stood up for that. And despite having to face a king, he showed no fear, and he told the king that he was under the subject of God's word and the rule of Jesus Christ as well. So there's a lesson in that for us, the bravery of Andrew Melville. So thanks for watching. We'll bring you the next one shortly, and just thank you again.